presentation, we believe, is very critical for this time, and especially as we approach the true new year for the people of the Most High. This presentation, or the need for us to do it, came out of our experiences following the passage of the Category 5 Hurricane Melissa, which devastated the island, leaving us without any ability to communicate with others through the phone, through internet. We had no electricity, no water. In fact, we were without these for about 2 months following the hurricane. And at the time of this particular recording, we still do not have internet connectivity in our area, and we still do not have the best or the most reliable communication mechanism through the internet or telephone either. But this presentation is very critical. Let us try to get into it. Loyal in the scattering. How YaHUaH measures obedience when covenant conditions are broken. And so we're looking at reckoning the feasts. Various persons in the scattering, in the nation of Israel, are in the process of gearing up themselves towards observing the feasts. And there is a bit of a concern within the community for us. We call it calendar wars, and we see where different groups, different persons are following particular reckonings of the year. And what YaHUaH showed us was so eye-opening, sobering, humbling, that we do trust, and it is our expectation that this will touch someone else and bring clarity for someone else. So the focus of the presentation is on how YaHUaH measures obedience in exile. So this presentation is not about abolishing the feasts. It's not about enforcing what is now called a calendar. This presentation is about how YaHUaH measures obedience in exile. It is about learning how to remain loyal without pretending exile is restoration, and how to remember YaHUaH's appointed times without replacing his order with our own systems and our own interpretations and understandings. What we are wrestling with is not rebellion, it is honest covenant tension. What we are wrestling is not rebellion, it is honest covenant tension. And Thurah has room for that. And Thurah provides responses to these particular concerns. So, first, we must remember, recognize, understand. Thurah was given for a land, a people, and an order. And this, of course, we see in Oikara 23, verse 10. And it says, speak to the children of Israel. We spoke about a people. And you shall say to them, when you come into the land, when you come into the land, specific land, which I give you, which YaHUaH has given, and shall reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the Kahan, or the priest. So we see from this verse, it is land-based, agricultural, Kahan governed, and place centered. When we go through chapter 12 of Hadabarim, it tells us there would be a chosen place, a centralized service, a regulated priesthood. Torah does not float abstraction. In Bamadabar, or Numbers 18, it establishes that the Kahanim would administer particular dedicated matters. This means something important must be said out loud. You see, Torah was never designed to function fully or flawlessly without land, priesthood, and YaHUaH's order. Torah was not designed to function fully and flawlessly without land, priesthood, and YaHUaH's order. So, if we pretend nothing has changed, we risk creating a version of Torah that YaHUaH never gave Masha or Moses for Yisrael. We cannot pretend that nothing has changed. We cannot pretend that we are not in the land that YaHUaH promises to give us. We cannot pretend like exile does not exist. We cannot pretend as though, as a people, we have been brought back together. We can't pretend as though that has happened. It has not yet happened. So, Thurah itself foretold of a scattering. And exile is not a surprise. Hadabarim 28 says, YaHUaH will scatter you among all the peoples from one end of the Arats, or the earth, to the other. Hadabarim 29 describes future generations looking at a land devastated and asking, why has YaHUaH done this? Hadabarim 30 begins with these words, when all these things come upon you, and you return to your heart, or your lab, among the nations. Return to your heart, or your lab, or your labab, among the nations. So notice carefully, Torah speaks of returning to the heart. Never said when all these things come upon you and you return to the land. When you return to your heart, among the nations. So it's not restoring mechanics. It's talking about the condition of the heart. How we are internally. How do we observe? Not by mechanics, but with heart, with labab. And this matters. Because YaHUaH never expected land-level obedience in a landless condition. He never asked the scattered to rebuild what he himself removed. Yadah YaHUaH. We're told that we should observe the feasts or the appointed times, and we make it clear that not all appointed times are feasts, but all feasts are appointed times. So we're told to observe these appointed times throughout our generations. Many of us struggle here. Thurah says the feasts are to be kept forever throughout your generations. So what does that mean? It does not mean identical execution in every covenant condition. We must remember we have been scattered on different land areas, with different geographic conditions, with different seasonal shifts that do not take place all at the same time. Let's look at this example of Pesach, or the Passover. In Mitzrayim, or Egypt, Passover, the signal and the symbol that stood out was blood on doorposts. In the wilderness, it was household slaughter. Each household coming together and slaughtering a lamb. In the land, when they came in, it was centralized sacrifice. In exile, it became remembrance and instruction. And in the restoration to come, the Nabim say it will be reestablished again. The same feast, different administrations. Same feast, but it did not look the same way, and it did not take the same form in all these situations. We cannot pretend that nothing has changed. YaHUaH never says, if you cannot keep it perfectly, abandon it. No. La, he says, do not forget it. So, how does YaHUaH measure obedience in exile? And this is the heart or the core of this presentation. Because YaHUaH measures obedience in exile and in these observances by orientation and not replication. And there are 4 measures. And let's look at the 4 measures. 1, zakar, remembrance. Shemot, or Exodus 13:3, tells us to remember, zakar, remember. Devarim 8 verse 2 says, you shall remember all the way which YaHUaH led you. Again, remember. In exile, remembrance is obedience. So our focus is to remember the feasts and appointed times, to remember their meanings, to remember their order, to remember who our ancestors were and what YaHUaH did and continues to do, to remember the covenant purpose of these feasts. We are to teach them to our children. We refuse to forget who we are. Zakar, to remember. Zakur, remember. The second measure, intentional alignment and not illusion. When we look at chapter 8 of 1st Malachi, or Kings, it says that when Yisrael is taken captive, they are to pray toward the land. They were not told to pray toward a calendar or toward a rebuilt system but they were told to pray toward home. Now, we have been moved so many times, our people that is, that home is geographically uncertain right now for many of us. Some believe it is the land over there now called Israel. Some believe it is somewhere in northern Africa. Some say southern, some say western. But we cannot say for certain where home will be, because YaHUaH says, I will gather you and I will put you in the land. He will be the one to tell us where home truly is. But what we know for certain is that in YaHUaH we live, we move, and we exist. YaHUaH is our home. YaHUaH is our shelter. So YaHUaH measures, are we aiming toward his order and looking to him for guidance? Or are we settling comfortably in exile order and creating contention over whose research finding is correct or perfect? You cannot perfect Thurah in exile or replicate everything in exile. Intentional alignment, when joined with humility, counts as obedience. We must be intentional in ensuring as best as possible our actions and observations align with Thurah, and we must be humble enough to admit that we are still learning, we are still finding ourselves, we are still in need of guidance from the Most High YaHUaH. The third measure, humility under limitation. Micah 6 verse 8 says, what does YaHUaH require of you but to walk humbly? The Hal 131, when we read that chapter, we find that the writer says, I do not occupy myself with things too great or too marvelous for me. So humility in exile looks like this. We admit that we cannot know everything. We admit that we cannot know all there is to know until YaHUaH does the restoration. We refuse to declare certainty where Thurah allows restraint. And we do not weaponize calendars against one another. YaHUaH is not offended by limitation. He's offended by arrogance. The fourth measure, unity of the scattered. Ezekiel 11:16 says, though I have cast them far off among the nations, yet I shall be to them a little sanctuary where they have gone. YaHUaH will be our covering, and he is our covering. He is our hiding place. He is our safe place. In exile, it means, therefore, the gathering of his people becomes Kadash, space, and not the specific building, not the specific date. The gathering. Unity becomes the altar. Shalom becomes the offering. YaHUaH values fellowship over technical perfection. So, we emphasize again, YaHUaH is not offended by limitation. He's offended by arrogance. We cannot be arrogant people with our findings in exile. So someone may ask the question, and I've heard persons ask this question, should we keep the feast then? Since we return to heart, should we? The short answer is Khan. Yes. But we keep them as remembrance, rehearsal, and longing, not as final fulfillment, not as restored administration, not as authoritative decree. Wikara 23 calls the appointed times, and the Kadash gatherings are called Mikara Kadash. Some may know Mikra, meaning dedicated or separated, rehearsed assemblies or meetings. They are rehearsals, divine rehearsals of what is to come. So in exile, we rehearse what we will one yom fulfill or perform fully. What we will fully perform one day. So we are in rehearsals. This is practice. We are remembering where we are coming from. We're rehearsing and longing for the restoration to come. Someone may say, but what about Chanuk and Jubilee? Enoch and Jubilees. Because for some persons, they would stick to this and the reckoning of these books. Now here's what we found, and we just honor Yahuwah for who he is. Chanuk and Jubilee are not Thurah, and so they are not binding, but they are not meaningless either. They represent priestly concern during a time of calendar corruption. So the writings of these particular books assume that the land of Israel is accessible. Barley and crops can be observed. That's agricultural. The luminaries follow predictable cycles, or rather that they are functioning, and the Kahanim or priests administer the reckoning. These conditions do not exist in exile. So their reckoning and instructions in precise format cannot be universally applied while scattered. We show you examples. We have attempted to follow different systems that we have researched. We followed observation of the moon, but then there were times when the moon did not come out or follow its particular order. We have done the systems way. We have used Chanuk or Enoch, but then we recognized that Enoch's example would have been, or Enoch's reckoning, which of course collaborates or corroborates that which is said in Jubilee, and vice versa, would have been the ideal. So it assumes that equal Yom and Lila will always fall after or on day 364. But when you look at the reckoning now, if you try to do it now where you are, because you had to observe, you would have had to observe to see when equal Yom and Lila appears. It's not something you can pre-calculate. It comes by observation. And so when you observe, you would recognize that if equal Yom and Lila are to be the primary markers, you may or may not obtain 364 Yumim. And if you stick slavishly to 364 Yumim, you may or may not land on equal Yam and Leela. And equal Yam and Leela differs from geographic location to geographic location across the Arats. We spoke about those who are in parts of the Arats that may be seeing summer, but another part of the Arats is experiencing winter simultaneously. So the instructions of these books in precise format cannot be universally applied while scattered. Applying them in our time, in the scattering, in exile, as if truly binding exceeds Thurah authority. They help us, however, to understand what the ideal looks like and what existed in a particular context. Yubileem repeats Thurah loyally, because some may argue that Yubileem is Thurah. It repeats Thurah loyally and preserves the reckoning or the calendar disputes of old, but it is not Thurah itself. It was written for land-based covenant context. Another question may be, why are there different ancient calendars associated with Yisrael? And you can tell calendar wars, as we call them, are not new. The mere fact that various calendars exist, various reckonings existed from ancient times among our people, tells you what is happening now with so many arguing that their reckoning is correct, their reckoning is the correct or the true one. It's not new. The confusion we experience today concerning the calendar is not a modern failure, nor is it proof of rebellion. It is the consequence of scattering, of exile. Scripture itself preserves evidence that multiple calendar systems coexisted among the people of Israel, each claiming fidelity to Yahuwah's appointed times. This tension, Mishpaka, did not begin in exile. It existed while the temple still stood, while Kahanim still served, and while the land was still occupied. The Thurah gives principles, not mechanical algorithm. When later generations attempted to force certainty where Yahuwah allowed dependence on him, disagreement emerged. So let's look at the 4 ancient calendars that many use now to argue. There was what was called the temple calendar. The basis for this calendar was observing luminaries. For some, they observe the moon only. For some, they observe all 3 categories of luminaries, the great light, lesser light, and the stars. It also involved observing barley. They had to literally go out and look to see when the barley was abib. Technically, the month is not called abib. It is the state of barley. So when barley is abib. And that is how some began to call the month abib. But the observation of the barley was that it was to be in ripeness. And at that time also, the seasonal cycles were tied to agriculture. So there was a time for barley. And notice when we started out with the scripture, you saw where the Most High said, when they come into the land I give them and reap the harvest, Then they are to take some of it to the Kahanim, for the Kahanim to make certain pronouncements, for the Kahanim to present it to YaHUaH, etc. So seasonal cycles were tied to agriculture. Wheat followed later for Shabuath, or the Feast of Weeks. You had fruits, grape, wine, oil, fruits that followed later on during Sukkot. Agriculture. This is the only reckoning explicitly described in Thurah itself. The year began when barley was a babe in the land of Canaan, so it was land-based, agricultural-based. The luminary cycles were observably aligned. So when we talk about predictability, we're not talking about prediction from people, but the luminaries would follow their appointed movements in and out through their gates, respective gates, etc. But our people had to cite these observances of the luminaries. Spring had to have arrived. So for us in exile, what we look for is really spring, the arrival of spring. This reckoning, the temple calendar, required land. It required the Kahanim, and we can reference Adabarim 17 and 8 to 11 to see what their functions were in governing and providing right ruling and declaring certain things, and anything that troubled the people, any matters they weren't sure about, they had to take it to the Kahanim. Elders who kept the gates, judges or shapatim, witnesses, those who would see the barley, see the luminaries, and functioning agriculture. It was never portable. It could not be calculated in advance for generations unborn. It required obedience, humility, and dependence on YaHUaH's created order. These conditions are not perfectly aligned in exile. The second calendar, the priestly solar calendar, or the 364-day calendar. This is also called the Qumran or Zadokite calendar. Now its structure is 364 Yumim, 52 weeks. Feasts always fall on the same weekday, no luminary dependence. This calendar was said to be preserved by a priestly sect, often identified as Zadokite priests, who believed the temple leadership in Jerusalem had become corrupt. They argued the moon causes corruption to the appointed times, as we see in Jubileum 6. This calendar prioritized order and predictability, but severed dependence on agriculture and witness citing. It required no land, no barley, no priest court, only calculation. This calendar was not rabbinic and predates later Judaism, but it also goes beyond Thurah by removing the observation of the luminaries, which were put in place for seasons and times, appointed times, which were to be observed because they guided that particular reckoning. The existence of this calendar, in addition to the temple calendar which we looked at previously, proves that calendar disagreement existed while Thurah was still being practiced in the land. The third type of calendar, would be royal or civil administrative calendars. Kingdom governance calendars, what they call them. These particular calendars would often run concurrently with the actual year. So you would have taxation year, military service year, construction, governance, even agricultural year. So when would you plant? When would you pay taxes, etc.? And we see these functions in different writings. First Malachim, Second Chronicles, agricultural cycles, royal records. This calendar often began in the fall, aligning with harvest cycles and royal administration. It is reflected later in what is called the civil year, though that term is post-biblical. As I began to state earlier, this calendar coexisted with the Thurah festival calendar. So it governed societal administration and not worship. So you had the actual year where the appointed times existed, but then you had other particular reckonings for the purpose of government, not worship. This explains why scripture sometimes counts years differently without contradiction. It's similar to how, let's use an example. You may have a particular calendar year, but within that you have a financial year, you have a school year, agricultural year, but they all run across the same calendar year. Hopefully that helps. The fourth calendar type is the exile or survival calendar. So these are the various adaptations in the scattering. And this began from the period of the Assyrian exile onwards. The context of these calendars, however, no land. So we would not be in the land YaHUaH gives us. No barley to observe in the scattering across the Arats. No temple, no priestly court, no foreign foreign skies or luminaries that are moving in the same time frame across the Arats. We see altered seasons and even agriculture that moves outside of its season because the earth groans. And there are things happening out of season. Yisrael in exile did not stop remembering, they adapted. So Yechazakal, for example, who was in captivity, still marks appointed times in exile. And we can look at chapters 45 and 46. Daniel still prayed towards Jerusalem. We see that in chapter 6 of Daniel. Thurah 137 mourns the inability to perform the temple worship. So we see the presence of 4 different calendars, or calendar systems rather, reckoning systems from ancient times, which shows there was a longing of the people to get it right. But unless the conditions are perfected again by the Most High YaHUaH, then the technicalities of observation will not be perfected. And so for those getting so caught up in the technicalities that sometimes you miss the true heart of the observation, that the true function of remembrance, rehearsal, and longing, that you get confused and it makes you frustrated. The true reckoning of the Most High required heavy dependence on Him. It was not something that we could predate years in advance. We had to observe. We recognized, for example, that when spring comes in Jamaica, there are places in North America that still have snow. When summer comes in the West, there are places in some, I believe, southern parts of Africa that are experiencing winter. These calendars were memorial calendars and not covenant fulfillment calendars. So the attempt to try to reckon and to observe is remembrance, expectation and longing, and identity. But they do not and could not fully replicate Thurah conditions. What this proves, there was never one uncontested calendar. Never. All of them have question marks. All of them have gaps. All of them are imperfect. Calendar tension is not new. It predates modern systems, modern religious systems, modern reckoning. Thurah never provides a universal exile algorithm. YaHUaH tied obedience to land, people, and presence. So, in this particular time, gathering to keep the feast together, when we come together at whatever times within the particular seasons, spring, notice that when spring arrived and we observed those feasts, the rest of the year depended heavily on those reckonings, because Shabuath would require the count. From that count, then all the other months would be aligned. But the first part of the year required the observation of spring conditions. There will be no universal, exact alignment of luminaries across the Arats at the same time. There will be no universal recognition of 364 Yumim that always exactly fall on equal Yom and Lila in exile. When we come together from many places with different environments, seasons, and observations, YaHUaH does not ask us for perfection. He asks us for obedience, for unity, for humility, for honesty. Yeshayahu 66 verse 2 says, "To this one I will look, to him who is humble and contrite in ruch, and who trembles at my word." The danger is not gathering imperfectly. The danger is declaring authority we do not possess. Over time we do not control. We must never replace longing with certainty, because we long for restoration. We long for the perfecting of the appointed times when we all will be gathered by YaHUaH together. We long for it. So we must not replace that longing for certainty in exile and comfort in exile. Neither must we replace humility with control and arrogance. Adabarim 30 promises regathering, and we believe it will be so. Ichazakal 37 shows bones coming together before breath and land. Yadah YaHUaH 14 says the nations will one day go up to keep the feast properly. We're not failing, we're waiting loyally. We do not keep the feast because we have arrived. We keep them because we remember. We keep them because we remember who we are and what our people were taken through, where they are from, and whose we are. And we believe YaHUaH will finish what He began. Because He who begins that great work will ensure it is complete even to the end. He will perfect all things. He will perfect all things. So until then, for those of us who continue to long, and for all of us who are still in exile, irrespective of where you are on the face of the Arats, we do not abandon the feasts because they are divine rehearsals. We are called to remember them. We're called to rehearse them, to teach our children them. Not to try in our own strength to perfect them. We do not weaponize dates against each other. We must remember, we rehearse, we assemble, we proclaim. And we say with humility, when YaHUaH restores Tziyun, or Zion, He will restore the reckoning of time. Until then, obedience is measured by steadfastness, not flawlessness. Not flawlessness. So as we move towards the feast, we know pockets of us, communities of us will observe at different times, but within the seasonal shifts. We all fully understand that spring is the time when the year begins. Until YaHUaH perfects the reckoning, let us gather and observe the feast. Return to our hearts among the nations, coming together in unity in whatever ways and however we can, looking to YaHUaH, who will make all things right. Who will make all things right in His time. Yadah YaHUaah.
We are the Nazarene of YaHUaH.
And of course, we say Akhad,
Ahabah,
which means
one love.
And we thank all our viewers and subscribers, all the family of the Most High, for viewing today's presentation.